up and offered to buy her one. Not that it seemed to be working this evening, but perhaps this part of London was simply too close to the city. The guys who worked there were different, weren't used to being told to take a hike, and often even struggled to take a hint. She gazed around the faded interior of the club, eyeing the peeling paint, grateful she wasn't sitting underneath what appeared to be a very precariously secured mirror ball hanging from the ceiling. Even in the more run-down parts of Harlem, a building like this would probably be condemned, and Sarah couldn't help but wonder whether it was typical of the London jazz scene. She was used to the traditional, smoke-filled New York clubs, having spent many an evening watching her father play sax in venues with names that formed parts of album titles. And they'd been a world away from this place. Worried she might suddenly burst into tears, Sarah reminded herself why she'd come here this evening. Her first 6 weeks away from New York had been pretty tough, but places like this had the potential to make things a little more bearable. So when she had spotted the flickering neon sign, alternately proclaiming the G-Spot and Jazz Club from her cab on the way home from a night out with a few of the women from the office, and a sudden desperate feeling of homesickness had overwhelmed her, she'd seen it as a chance to feel like a New Yorker again, at least for one evening. So she'd told the driver to pull over in front of the entrance, handed her share of the fare to Sally, the woman she'd been sharing the cab home with, and had all but run inside. Her BlackBerry buzzed, and as Sarah fumbled for it in her jeans pocket, she noticed another man trying to make eye contact from the other side of the room and hurriedly looked away. She'd become good at declining the many male advances that came her way. As a woman working in the city, you had to be, although recently she'd run out of excuses where David, her boss at the bank, was concerned. She glanced down at her phone to see his number flashing on the screen and quickly answered the call. "David, hi." "Just calling on the off chance you're still awake." She glanced at her watch, saw it was only 11 o'clock and smiled. "Well, if I wasn't, I am now." "Are you having a good time with the girls?" Sarah almost laughed. Girls was pushing it. Sally had been the next youngest, and she was probably nudging 50, old enough to be her mother, she realized with a start. And while she hadn't wanted to go out with them this evening, David had suggested it might be good for her, would even help her integrate, and she'd been too uncertain of her position, either at work or relationship-wise with David, to refuse. "It's been a blast," she said flatly. "Pleased to hear it," he said, failing to pick up on her tone. "Listen, I can hardly hear you, so, have fun, and I'll see you at the office tomorrow." "Sure. See you tomorrow," she said, then slipped her phone back into her pocket. In truth, she was a little irked that David had called, and wondered whether it was more to check she had actually taken his advice and not cried off. He'd been the one who'd engineered her move from the US, although not strictly for professional reasons, she suspected. From almost the moment she arrived, he'd begun asking her out, and she'd been flattered by his refusal to take no for an answer, so eventually she'd stopped giving it. And while their first date, dinner the previous weekend at Nobu, a breathtakingly expensive sushi restaurant on Park Lane, where David had completely failed to get her "this place is called Nabu" joke, and instead had given her a lecture on Japanese pronunciation, hadn't quite been the beginning of the fireworks going off overhead romance she'd been hoping for, Sarah had begun to suspect that the only fireworks she had ever experienced would be every 4th of July. Assuming she ever made it back to the States, that was. She looked up to see the man still watching her, and considered just drinking her wine and leaving. But like she had told Mr. Manhattan, she was here to hear some jazz, and Sarah was blowed if she was going to let anything or anyone spoil her plans. Besides, and to her relief, the lights were finally dimming, so she